So that constitutes the third person. So there's an I, a we, and an it. And that essentially can exist in relation to God as well. So in one sense, God then is understood to be my own personal, my own subjective experience of what God is, which could be something like awareness, like my awareness, which is God, or something like that. My own sense of consciousness, and that being God. So that's my subjective first-person experience of what God is. And then in a second-person perspective, that's where God is understood as a separate being, perhaps as a person, like with a personality, and that I can relate to God, I can do various I can surrender to God, I can have a relationship with God, and that's all in that second person perspective of God. And then in the third person perspective of God, that is in one sense when you think about God as opposed to relating to God. I think about God, or it can be in the sense that God is viewed as an overall system that exists, such as the great chain of being, from matter to body to mind to soul to spirit, and that this whole system that we actually exist in is viewed as a type of nature of reality that is God, sort of thing. So those three perspectives, or three faces of God, the process of showing up is essentially understanding and integrating all three of those perspectives, understanding that God can be understood in a first person, as a second person, and a third person, and engaging in these different aspects of our own self in relation to God, and essentially so that it is shown up in different, that there are various different religions around the world that emphasize a different face of God in a different way, and it's a good way to understand that we don't have to be restricted to just one particular face of God and have some kind of negative view about what the other faces are. Actually, all three faces are true and exist and should be explored through meditation and through that path. And so it's understanding that that no one path which takes, for instance, that God is an it or something like that, but it doesn't recognize that God can be related to something like that, sort of thing. So the process of showing up is essentially understanding those three faces of God. So the fourth one that we'll be covering is what is called cleaning up, and that essentially involves what is known as the integration of the shadow. So this is the idea that in the process of growing up and waking up and going through our life, certain aspects of our own self get split off and become sort of sub-personalities, or things that are known as shadows, and these are all sort of within what could be understood to be like the unconscious. And so these shadows get split off, and then they get projected onto other phenomena, such that if it was something like a fear or something, there could be that rather than feeling my own feelings of fear, I reject them and turn them into something else, and then that begins to be like, I am scared of this, or this thing is scary to me, and then that can be projected onto people, feelings of fear towards other people and stuff like that. That's one kind of example. So essentially there's this idea that the self needs reintegration through this idea of cleaning up, and there's a certain technique that can be used for getting at shadow material, and it's kind of therapeutic in nature, but basically the shadow content is recognized that, okay, this is having a disruptive influence on my life, there's something which is disrupting me. Normally it shows up as that I'm either really repelled by this particular thing within my awareness, or I am very attracted to this thing within my awareness. So, and then that thing is then focused on, and awareness is put into that, and then it's approached firstly in a third person kind of idea, which is where it's been removed from the self towards, and then basically you face the shadow, and then so by facing the shadow content, then you can engage in a dialogue and begin to actually uncover where this shadow comes from, what the thing is actually about, and through that process are able to re-own that shadow again, and so that it becomes first person content then. So then the shadow becomes first person, and then you can do types of meditation and stuff like that in order to reintegrate this shadow into the self. So that's known as cleaning up. So those four processes, waking up, growing up, showing up, and cleaning up, are sort of seen as the essentials for for a complete sort of more integral spiritual path, and if you miss out one of them, then it can cause certain problems. So that's essentially that. The other thing I just wanted to talk about was just what the quadrants are. So and then we're sort of roughly covering what is ACWL, or what is the ACWL mind model of how to view reality. And so essentially the quadrants are similar to those three perspectives that I already talked about, that there's a first person perspective, a second person, and a third person. So, but it's viewed through four instead, and essentially it's the individual and the collective viewed in the internal and the external. So the internal, the interior, and the exterior of the individual and the collective give rise to what are these four quadrants. And so in the upper left quadrant you have what are all subjective experiences of all first person experiences of what are myself, and that includes everything that I just talked about, the stages of development that people go through, and also the different states of consciousness that can be accessed. That all exists in that upper left quadrant. Exterior to that, and that's an individual. Exterior to that individual, those states and everything relate to certain brainwave patterns that can be picked up on EEG machines, and also to different parts of the brain that are activated as people go through these different stages, different types of thinking that open up, different aspects of the brain that are working, also going up into, as Ken Wilber says, there's SF 1, 2 and 3, which are actually non-physical bodies that exist. So there's a body element to each one of these higher stages and states that are. So essentially that's the external of those interior stages and states. Then going down to the collective on those quadrants, then you have on the interior of the collective, you have the area of cultures and shared values and beliefs, and the various stages that cultures move through together, through being tribalistic or magic mythic cultures, or whatever, going through those different stages but in relation to culture itself, and the way that people are to relate to each other, and the way in which our my self all has cultural influences that give rise to those. So that relates to the interior quadrant, and that there's a cultural aspect to the way that interior states and stages are interpreted through my actual cultural aspects, if you can understand that. So that's in that bottom left quadrant. And then exterior